I thought I'd just come on today and show my face and say hi and thank you for being here. And people have been interested in my craft space, so I'm just going to give you a tour around. So let's have a look at this set of drawers on my right hand side. I'm right handed, so this is sort of my go-to set of drawers. This is just a general drawer full of corner punches, little scraps there, my headphones, some little tiny punches there, and tissues just in the top drawer there. The second drawer, this is where I store the papers from the kits, the story kits I've collected over the years. I've got, I suppose, a small stash really of papers. That's mostly the 6x8 papers, and that's the 3x4 papers. Back here, I've got my notebook where I do some writing about, for instance, about the one little word that I'm doing, or notes I make about a class I'm taking. So I keep that in there. I think the word enjoy is in here somewhere. Good. There it is. That's my word for this year. I'm going to have another look at that shortly. So at the start of the year, I make a whole list of things there. And at the back here, I've got my cheat sheets for my die cutting machines if I forget which plates go with which. So that sits at the back there. This old kitchen foil box is what I use to keep my washi tape. I've got two there, and they just sit down there. Underneath my scrapbook papers here, I've got a little cellophane wallet of the vellums that I've had in that size. These are just offcuts of paper for making notes. And then a bag of transparencies that I have in that size. So they're there. And that is usually the kit for something that I'm about to work on, so I bring it downstairs and put it in there. I think that was the make story kit I got out for something. And then I keep my envelopes from my stories by the month kit in case I want to cut them up. That's where I got the stories by the month from, to punch out to put on this little box here from one of the kits. So that goes there. So that's really my paper drawer. If I'm looking for a pattern paper, a specific pattern paper in that size, that's where I go. And those are the 3x8s. This drawer is the engine room. So this is where I store everything that I want to hand. That just fits in there, that kit box. Again, these are mostly phone boxes from old iPhones, but I've got things in different places. So this here is the kit which I lift out. I've shown you before, that sits on my desk there. Then here I've got tab stickers, puffy stickers, word phrase stickers from previous kits. Here I've got the cards in 6x4 from my story kits that I disbanded and put them in here. And at the back, I think that's just extra 6x4 cards, and I've arranged them in colour. But they're from really old kits, probably from when I used to do Studio Calico years ago. So that goes back in there, and this goes back in here. This is how I organise my 3x4 cards. And after the stash class, I grouped the 3x4 cards into 4 categories, and they're there. This is my cheat sheet for the circle dies that I have. I've spoken about this before, and that just sits in the front of that box. But those are the dies I've got. And then if I've got an actual punch, I've punched a hole with it, and then I've got those there, and I've shown how I use that sometimes to place over something so that I can see which size it's going to fit. That just sits at the front of my drawer. Here I've got my hole punch. This is what I use for when I'm adding pages to my project life, and my fine tip glue. And then over here we've got inks, we've got my sticky tape, lots of different sizes of acrylic blocks down here, and some date stamps. I've got different roller date stamps from different manufacturers. Those two are Heidi Swap, I think, and these two are Ali Edwards. And then here I've got different glues, different sticky tapes, sticky pads, and a rubber, and spare staples for my tiny attacher. So all those things are to hand. At the back here, things I don't access very often. So this is where I keep my old sets of stamps from Stories by the Month. They just stood up at the back there in order. And this box in the middle here is just different tags and things that I've kept from different kits that I can just reach in and get a tag if I want it from there. That's the engine room, that drawer. That one's open most. This drawer is my cutter, and also a packet of spare page protectors from the 6x8 albums, all different sizes, which I've got labelled so I know what I've got, different sizes, and they're all in there. I also have some small alphas in here from different manufacturers that I've collected. I tend to buy small alphas if I buy any, because I do project life. These were small alphas that have come in previous kits or that I've kept, so I've got them all in one of these cut down packages from a kit. And underneath at the bottom of that drawer, I've got spare page protectors for my 9x12 album. The very bottom drawer is storage. It's got in it my organised embellishments. I, from the stash class, decided to put the embellishments I'd got into 2 boxes this size. So I've got 2 boxes this size with different embellishments in. If you haven't taken the stash class over at Ali Edwards, I recommend it, because it really did help me streamline my stash, and also it meant that I now use more of it. So that's one box. I've got a couple of sets of Stampin' Up stamps that I've bought that I got second hand recently off eBay, and then that's the other one. That's the other set of embellishments. I've organised hearts and flowers, and this one's different phrases from different kits. So those are my 2 embellishment boxes, and that's all the embellishments I have. But it means they're more accessible. I can open the box and see what I've got. Underneath there, I've got the Tim Holtz. It's a stamp pad, really, for I can't remember what they call it. Let's have a look what they call it. Oh, there's 2 sets of Ali Edwards stamps here. This one is the alphas, and this one was numbers. They sit at the front of that drawer. Stamp platform, that's what he calls it. Stamp platform. Yeah, so this is the stamp platform with the magnets, and it just means you can stamp in the same place. This is the Tim Holtz one, but I don't use it very often, but it sits in the bottom of that drawer. Also in this drawer, I've got my mega date stamps from Studio Calico. I have two. I suppose these will be running out soon. Yes, 2027. I've had this a long time. Look, 2016 it started. And this one is 2025, 24, 25, 26, 2015. So that one's even older. So I think that was, yeah, that one's the Jasmine Jones one. But I have these a while, but I do use them occasionally. So they just sit in that drawer. At the back there, I've got my spare stash of sticky tape, and then I've got some more alphas. I bought these after Ali used them years ago, and I keep those at the back. That's another Stampin' Up one. And then I've got that one, which is the bigger uppercase alpha. But yeah, I do get those out. Often at Christmas I get those out, so they're quite handy, but I don't have them out often, so that's why they're at the back. So that's the back of that drawer. That's a spare glue stick, so I've got plenty of stuff in there. So in the top drawer I have most of my inks. That's a rub it and scrub it pad for cleaning my stamps. And that's a little stamp mat that I put underneath for when I'm stamping, so that you've got a little bit of cushioning. But a lot of my inks are Ali Edwards inks on that side. I've got my Studio Calico inks here. And I've hung on to my Jenny Bowling inks. I really still like them, so I kept hold of them. At the very back here, I've got some extras, including all my metallics and some little cat eye inks that I still have from Studio Calico from a while ago. This is my stamp chamois, which I keep in a little Tupperware when I'm using it. And then I've got my Stays On black ink here, and my VersaFine, which I think gives a really clear black ink. I've got two sets of mini alpha stamps in there from Hero Arts, I think they were, but they came via Studio Calico. I used to subscribe there years ago, and so a lot of my stash comes from there. These boxes in here are mostly foam boxes or gift boxes, and that's how I do my organisation. So here we've got the second drawer, and in the second drawer I keep packets of white paper and card, just offcuts. I've got a bag of offcuts of page protectors and transparency, and some cellophane bags. I've got some clear vellum, and then some patterned vellum, which I keep in a separate little wallet. These are just old envelopes I've torn up to keep the pattern paper from. And then at the bottom here, I've got some metallics for Christmas work. So they're usually at the bottom from a variety of sources. Oh no, at the very bottom there, look, I've got a wallet full of coloured card. I don't have much coloured card, but sometimes you want particularly red at Christmas. I've got some there. At the front here, I've got some old page protectors with offcuts of different colours of scrapbook paper. So that's mostly blacks and greys. That's mostly pinks and reds. That's mostly yellows and orange. And that's mostly blues, and this one is mostly greens. So they're all just at the front of my drawer. So if I want a small offcut of a piece of coloured paper, scrapbook paper, then I've got those in some old page protectors, and they just slot in the front of this drawer. I've got an old set here, a kit from 49 Market that I had bought with some little bits and pieces of ephemera in there as well. So that's the second drawer, and my clipboard also lives in that drawer. In the third drawer, I have some more inks. I did used to have a lot more of the Ranger inks from Tim Holtz, but I decided to get rid of some of them. So I've just kept a selection of the oxide inks, and I've got them all labelled up here with my label making machine. So I can see at a glance what I've got in there. I did keep some ink blending tools as well, so they're in there. At the back here, I've got my embossing powders and my Versamark ink, and they often only come out at Christmas. That's just a duster that I use for dusting all the embossing powder up. And then at the very back, I've got some punches that I don't use very often. These are a few punches that I've kept from my collection. I had an awful lot of punches, and I've mentioned before that I sold a lot and bought dies instead when I was putting my stash into these two sets of drawers, because the dies take up a lot less room. But I did keep some squeeze punches of things like stars and hearts, which are at the back there. I've got a few little boxes here with different things in labelled, things that are left over from kits that I've just labelled up. And then at the front here, I've got a set of trays that I bought, which are actually jigsaw sorting trays, but there's a set of them, and I use them for my bridge storage. If you've taken Ali Edwards' stash class, then she suggested putting things into bridge storage, and I didn't have opportunity to get different size trays, but these fit perfectly in this drawer. So I've got 6 trays in here, and I can keep things out. I've got my travel collection ephemera embellishments in here at the moment, because I've been working on some travel spreads, so that goes in there. So here's the fourth drawer. Now this is a mixture of my die cutting and my sewing. So I've got a range of cheap threads that I bought in the supermarket for different colours. It doesn't have to be strong thread for sewing on paper. And then in here I've got all the plates I need for my die cutting machines. I have got a very old Cuttlebug machine. I then bought a Gemini Crafter's Companion electronic die cutting machine, which I don't actually keep in here because I don't die cut that often, but the Cuttlebug is on the bottom shelf of my Rascog cart. And then this one, which I find the most useful, which is just the Sizzix Sidekick, and that just pops in there. So that's all my die cutting. I've got some extra big acrylic blocks there, and then this is at the back here. If I take that out, I've got my little sewing box and some oh look, I've got some more really old Prima chalk inks there, which occasionally I do use occasionally if I'm short of a colour. Yes, Gemini Junior, that's what I've got as my electronic die cutter, but I don't get that out very often. And in the bottom drawer, here I've got all my dies. I had a phase where I did quite a bit of die cutting, and I bought quite a few dies. And if I've kept them in the packet, they're at the back here. I did some card making and things. So I've got some dies here at the back, different shapes. This is what I bought when I got rid of a lot of my punches. So I've got all those in there, some other Tim Holtz Sizzix dies at the back there. I've got some alphas, some big numbers, slim alpha, that's lowercase, and that's uppercase. I kept a few of my embossing folders because I do use these at Christmas. So I've got some embossing folders in there, some old and some new. I've got these little switch lits. I've got 2 or 3 of those. They fit in the side kit quite nicely, some of them. So I've got those. This folder here is my ink swatch folder. And I have sampled every ink that I own and did it with the same stamp and mounted it in these 2x2. This was a Laura Wanzik idea from a class I took over at Ali Edwards. I've kept some of my distress stains as well, so they're on there. But that's really handy if you want to match up a colour, just to grab this folder and have a look at what colours you've got and what goes with what. I've even got some samples of the metallics that I've got, next page, and how they work on black and white card. So that's what that folder is. And then this is my folder of dies. I showed this the other week on my reel. But basically this is how I store my dies. And there's a whole load of them in there, just in this old basic grey album. So that fits neatly into that drawer. On my desk here, I've got a box here that's got my Tim Holtz guillotine in and a cutting mat, a small cutting mat. I've then got some bits of ephemera for things that I'm working on in the back there. And in the front, I've got some extra sets of stamps that I know I pull out quite often. So these tend to sit in this box on here. This is my selfie printer. Over here in the UK, we can't get the Epson Picturemate, so this is the one I still use, the Epson printer, and I print my photos at home. On this side of my screen, my kit usually sits out on my table when I'm working. And on this side of the screen, I've just got a mixture of pens and my tiny attacher in that pot. Some different pens and bone folders and tweezers in that pot, and some other normal pens and pencils in the back pot. Always space for a coffee or a glass of water. And then a little desk light that sometimes I use if it gets really dark in here. So here's my Rascog cart. On the top, I've just made this machine cover. I keep my sewing machine. It's really handy. And I've just propped it up so that it's easy accessible above the edge of this top shelf. The foot pedal just sits at the bottom down here on the floor. So it's easy to just swing round from my desk and do a bit of stitching, which I do really frequently. And that is my little mini sewing kit I made, which is just made from a mason jar with all my bits and pieces in. So that sits in there usually. So that's the top shelf. The middle shelf I've got at the front here, I've got my stamp storage. So I've got it all in categories. The ones I've been using at the moment are all at the front. On the middle shelf here, I've got my stamps. I've shared this before on my Instagram. I've got the big alphas at the back and the smaller sets that I've curated from my previous Stories by the Month kits. I've got those at the front here, so they're all in there, easy to pull out. I've got some baker's twine there in red and in black, and at the back here I've got the punches that I have left, some Fiskars punches, some other punches there that I have left in my collection. And then on the bottom shelf I've got my old Cuttlebug, and then in these old pouches from the kits I've got things like twine, sequins, tags, transparencies, enamel dots, frames, envelopes. Those are ribbons, and this one is Avery index tabs. So these are just easier to store, and they all sit on this bottom shelf really handily, so I can just turn around and grab something. I don't use them often, I've not got a big stash, but they're really good. I've got some 12 by 12 papers in the back there, stood up, and that's my Rascog card.